Hi, everyone, and welcome, Mr. Tom Raftery.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for inviting me. And hi, everyone. Great to be talking to you all today, I guess.
It's fantastic to have a pioneer regarding sustainable podcasts. So, in a quick words, could you briefly introduce yourself and tell a bit about your origin story?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Tom Raftery. I'm originally from Cork in Ireland, now living in Seville in the south of Spain. Been here since 2008. I'm a graduate biologist, although you wouldn't know that because after graduating in biology, I went on to do postgrad in biology. But while I was doing that, I branched into technology because I thought it was interesting, and also I'm a little ADD. So I started going into technology and set up a software company. And in the software company, we, again, ADD, we were very bleeding edge. We were doing a lot of really out there stuff. This was in the late 90s. And we wrote some of the first games for mobile phones that we sold in Ireland to Aircell, the national carrier at the time. And then I merged the software company with another software company in 2002. And again, bleeding edge stuff. We were delivering web delivered, so SaaS, basically SaaS apps for reverse logistics. And we had, Tyco and Philips as customers, and stayed with that company until 2004 when I set out on my own to set up a social media consultancy. So this was like 2005, 2006. At the time, social media was really in its infancy. Blogging was the big thing at the time, and RSS was the delivery mechanism. So did that through to 2008. And then in the middle of that as well, myself and a good buddy, two friends, in fact, but one particularly, the three of us set up a data center in Cork in Ireland. And at the time, this was 2006, at the time, there were 7 or 8 data centers in Ireland. They were all in Dublin. There was none in Cork. So we figured that'd be a good reason to set one up in Cork. And because we were bootstrapping it, there are 3 main costs to building a data center. There's staff, there's connectivity, and there's energy. On the staff front, we did sweat equity. On the connectivity front, we built the data center on the top of a hill overlooking the city, right beside the Apple plant, actually, up in Hollyhill in Cork. And we put a 25-meter mast in the courtyard of the data center, and then we sold space on the mast to the local wireless internet service providers, so that we were increasing the amount of megabytes we were buying per month, which was reducing our cost. So that brought that down. And then we went to town on the energy front. We designed the data center to be hyper energy efficient. And because I had the social media background, I was able to market it as such. And we did everything like we publicized pictures of the build out, everything from the arrival of the backhoes to, dig out the foundations right the way through to the delivery of customer kit into the racks. We documented it all using Flickr, using video, using blogs, etc. So everyone saw it being built out. And that kind of got me a name for myself in the green tech space. And then in 2008, as I mentioned, I moved here to Spain. And when I moved to Spain, I did so for personal rather than professional reasons. And so I needed a job, because I didn't speak Spanish at the time. I needed a job that would allow me to work through English. So I was lucky enough to land a job with a company called Red Monk, where I was, Red Monk is an industry analyst firm, and I headed up the branch of Red Monk that dealt with energy and sustainability. I led research there and did that. We termed that business Green Monk. And I led the research there until 2016, sorry. And then I was recruited into SAP and came into SAP as initially an IoT evangelist and subsequently a technology evangelist, essentially. And I was all the time working at kind of the intersection of technology and sustainability. And then, unfortunately, I was impacted by the tech layoffs in late 22. So now I'm out on my own. While I was with SAP, I set up 2 podcasts. One is called Sustainable Supply Chain, and the other is called Climate Confident. And they're weekly podcasts. Sustainable Supply Chain, I publish a new episode every Monday, 7 a.m. CET. Boom, a new episode drops. And then Climate Confident, every Wednesday, 7 a.m. CET. Boom, new episode drops. So I'm in the Sustainable Supply Chain podcast. I'm about 400 and something episodes in, and on the climate one, about 180 episodes in. And when I left SAP was good enough to allow me to take the podcast with me. So I'm still publishing on those, still putting out new episodes all the time. So I think that kind of brings us more or less up to today.
Yeah, and I can highly recommend to everyone to listen to your podcasts.
Thank you.
Regarding the data center, I must ask, it sounded like you built it in social media, like really transparency was the key to that, and you were building like a community.
Correct. Yeah. We had a lot of discussions online about it. We were the first people, as far as I know, I couldn't find any other at the time. We were the first people online to mention cold aisle containment. So, we talked about that in one of the blog posts when we were talking about the racks that we were putting in on this new methodology, new at the time methodology we were putting in called cold aisle containment, which is very, very energy efficient. There are even more better systems in place now, but at the time that was really cutting edge.
So is there something like, if companies are listening and they're thinking about how do they communicate about their sustainability efforts and their transition, any tips for them?
Yeah, again, as you say, be as transparent as possible. It's now vitally important if you're collecting sustainability information, if you're collecting that data, to make that data, make sure A, that it's verifiable, and B, make it transparent. So do capture and make public the sustainability information that you want to be known for. So, if it's greenhouse gas emissions, if it's miles driven, if it's whatever it is, water reduction, waste reduction, any of these kind of things, be capturing the data first so that then you can make that data public. Because a lot of people, they're not always capturing that data. It's vitally important that you capture that data. It's vitally important if you're going in any sustainability program to start by capturing the data so that you can baseline and then set out on the project itself so you can monitor the reductions that you're looking for.
And customers are getting more climate conscious all the time, so they want to find out all that information.
And it's not just customers, Anthony. It's also if you have employees, it's your employees. So if you can tell a good sustainability story, you'll find the cost of customer acquisition reduced because, as you rightly mentioned, customers are looking for more sustainable products to purchase now. But also, so are employees. Employees are looking for companies that have a purpose that they can align with. So if you have a good sustainability story to tell, again, you'll find your cost of recruitment and retention for employees goes down. In one of my podcast episodes, I talked to a guy called Ken Pucker, and Ken was the COO of Timberland back in the early 2000s, back when they very early on started reporting their emissions. And he said that when they went out, when they posted jobs online, the level of candidates that they got for those jobs was much, much higher than they felt they should have got. And it was because they had such a good name in sustainability.
What about if I'm not, as a company, yet prepared for sustainability? I know what to track, I know my baseline, but I just started. Should I make it still public to everyone that I have a great purpose and a why, but I'm really in the early phase?
Yeah, I mean, as long as you're transparent about it, as long as you say, put your hands up and say, look, we're not in a good space right now. Here's where we are, but this is our target for the next 5 years. So every year or every quarter, or whatever reporting mechanism you want to put in place, we'll be reporting against those targets, and you as a customer will be able to monitor us. So a lot of what we did when we were building up the data center was we didn't just say what we were doing, we also asked for feedback. And in some cases, some of the feedback was so good, we took it on board and changed what we were doing to take that feedback on board.
Wow. How did you get the feedback?
We were doing a lot of it through blogs, so it was through comments, the comments feature in the blog posts. That was most of our feedback. Some came in via email, some by probably just conversations we had at meetings and stuff, because we went to a lot of conferences and talked about it as well. But I'd say the vast majority came through comments on our blog posts.
So you built the data center with your community.
Yeah.
While building the community.
Exactly. And of course, then we had instant customers.
No, that's pretty inspirational for everyone. I listened to a podcast where you mentioned I'll quote it. It was climate. We're transitioning towards a climate economy. Could you elaborate that? Open up that a bit?
Sure. Well, it's essentially what I'm saying is that let me take a step back here for a second. So here in Europe, we've decided that we're going to reduce our emissions 55% by 2030 against our 1990 baseline. That's huge. That's incredibly ambitious. To give you an idea, we're already about 23% along the way. That's just happened over the last number of decades. So we still have about 22% left to get out of the system. Now, to give you some context, when we had the pandemic and the global shutdowns in 2020, our emissions went down 7%. And then back in 2021, when we started opening up again, our emissions went back up 5%. So between 2020 and 2021, we had a 2% net reduction. Now we have to get another roughly 30% out of the system in the next 5 years, 5 and a little bit years, because, that's what 2030 is. It's a little over 5 years away. So that's incredibly, incredibly ambitious. And this isn't just some goal that we've set for ourselves. These are binding mandatory targets for all 27 nations of the EU. So there's a lot of change coming, and it's not going to be easy. So with that in mind, there's going to be a huge increase in regulation on businesses that are based in the EU, because a lot of emissions come from the operation of businesses. So those are going to change. A lot of it will be around the veracity of measurement and reporting. And so because of that, the role of the chief sustainability officer in a company to date has very often been reporting into the chief marketing officer. And, that kind of tells its own story. But with the increasing rigor that is coming around reporting, I see that chief sustainability officer migrating from the chief marketing officer's organization to the chief financial officer's organization. And so what that means, to get back to your question, is that every single business decision that's being taken from here on out will be judged not just on its financial implications, but also on its climate implications. Hence, I say we're moving towards a climate economy where everything is based around its climate implications. That makes sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And what I'm really interested in, how do you effectively communicate within your organization? Because you have a chief supply chain officer, you have logistics director, you have someone responsible for reporting emissions, and you have so many different roles, but I think you have also so many silos as well. How do you
Yeah,
handle the supply chain with the new regulations and the new organizational changes?
yeah, it's a good question. And silos are always troublesome, particularly for cross-functional things like sustainability. And there isn't an easy way around that except to find some platform that allows you to cut across those silos and gather information from all the places it needs to be gathered from. There
But
are there are good applications out there that allow for that, and I've talked to many of these um, companies on the two podcasts I run, to be honest. But it is challenging. It is hard. You do likely need a third party application, cloud delivered with API access to suck data and present you with it in a format that cuts across the silos that you have within your own organization.
Mm. And is this like transitioning towards a climate economy? Is it like leveraging the value of logistics within the organization? Like, is logistics becoming more valuable because of the new regulations?
Potentially, potentially. I mean, it depends on the organization, obviously. I mean, for example, a law firm isn't going to have a big requirement for logistics. Uh, so it depends on the organization. But for organizations that do have a big logistics arm, then you've got to see where savings can be made there. What I mean by that is your measurement of your emissions, which is, I mean, where a lot of your logistics are going to cause issues for you, is going to be the measurement of your emissions. So your logistics organization needs to be outfitted so that you can measure emissions from it. And then you need to see where the greatest amount of emissions are, and then obviously start making adjustments so that you reduce those emissions. And they can be there are many tactics and strategies you can deploy for doing that. One of the most effective, obviously, would be to shift all of your logistics to electric and then source 100% renewable electricity. That drops your emissions significantly straight away. But I understand that's challenging given the amount of EVs that are available for logistics operations today. It's not great. That is improving all the time. And also from a change management perspective, a lot of fleet managers, a lot of drivers, etc., wouldn't be up to speed on electric vehicles and might resist the move. So that's something that you're going to have to work with in an organizational development type role. So that's challenging as well. But what I will say on the EV front is electric vehicles cost about 50% to maintain versus a petrol or diesel vehicle. And the cost of the fuel is obviously significantly less as well. So if you do and can transition to EVs, once you get over the initial hurdles, it'll start to pay for itself very quickly.
Mm. I had a friend that told me that he's driven almost over 200,000 kilometers with his EV, and
Mm-hmm.
there has been no repair cost during that time.
Yeah. I mean, they don't have oil changes, they don't have belts, they don't have any of the kind of things that a standard internal combustion engine vehicle has. In fact, if you look at a standard internal combustion engine vehicle, the engine has about 2,000 moving parts. Whereas if you look at the drivetrain of an EV, it's about 20 moving parts. So there's far, far less to go wrong. And so they're incredibly reliable. The batteries go on forever. The loss of life in the battery of an EV, the loss of capacity, is nothing like the loss of the battery in your iPhone, for example, or your Android phone. Because the batteries are such a large component of the vehicle, they're coddled, they're completely spoiled by the battery management system. And so typically you lose about 1% of capacity for every 30,000 kilometers driven, which means by 300,000 kilometers driven, you're at about 90% of the original capacity of the vehicle. So the batteries go on forever. So, they're really, really economical for logistics fleets.
Mm. And how you're living now in Spain, Sevilla. So
Yep.
how has the logistics fleet changed there?
It depends on the organizations, the companies that are around us. One of the ones that is most visible in its move to EVs is Amazon. So when you see the Amazon delivery vehicles going around here, they're typically EVs. I would say I'd be, licking my finger and sticking it up in the air, but I'd say around 80% of the Amazon delivery vehicles here now are EV. That's for the last mile delivery.
Mm.
The postal service here as well has gone to EVs. So when you see the postman coming to your house, he's typically coming on either an electric motorbike or on an electric van. So Correos is the Spanish postal service, and they've gone down the EV path very strongly. If you think of others like the big multiples, the likes of Mercadona or El Corte Inglés or any of those delivering groceries, they're still using internal combustion engine vehicles that I've seen. So Spain isn't as far ahead as a lot of the more northern European countries, I got to say, when it comes to the shift to EV. Not sure why that is, but when you are in the likes of the Netherlands or Germany or places like that, you'll see far more EVs than you will here. That's changing, I'm glad to say, in the last 12 to 18 months. When I go out anytime now on the road, it's unusual that I don't see one or two other EVs on the road. Whereas 12, 18 months ago, it would be unusual for me to see another EV. So the number of EVs on the road now are starting to pick up, which is good to see.
Mm. Okay, nice to hear. So, because I've been listening to a lot about your podcasts, and from there, I've noticed, and you've said it yourself, that you really love on figuring out patterns and trends
Oh, yeah.
and thinking what's going to happen next in the 5 years, 7 years, 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you think will happen with the climate transition that we're moving towards in the next 5 to 7 years?
Yeah, it's going to be challenging, isn't it? I think the fact that we here in Europe have those 2030 goals, or mandates, I should say, it means we're going to see a lot more climate-related legislation coming down. There will be pushback against it, obviously. There always is. Anytime there's change, there's pushback against it, but it is mandated. We have to hit those goals. So we're going to see a lot of, as I say, regulations coming down around carbon, around emissions. We probably, it's 27 nations in the EU. Not all 27 nations are going to hit those goals. Some are doing better than others. I was looking at some of the data from the European Commission today on the amount of renewables in the grids in Europe. And here in Spain, in 2023, we were at 22% of renewables on our grid, whereas Ireland, where I'm from, was at 13%. So Ireland have a long way to go, I'm afraid, to catch up. Even 22% isn't great. But having said that, the 22% that's not great here, Spain also has nuclear reactors. So those are, once built, they're pretty much carbon free as well. So the carbon free electricity on the Spanish grid, if you look at it from the Red Eléctrica de España, which is the organization that monitors it, if you look at the data, daily it's between 70 and 90% of emissions free sources for the electricity. So that's wind, solar, nuclear, hydro. Those are the main ones that contribute. So that's pretty good. Ireland doesn't have nuclear, so that 13% in Ireland's case They have a long way to go back in Ireland to, get to the goals by 2030.
Hmm. But do you think that we will make the goal by 2030?
I think most countries will. It'll be hard. I don't think all countries will. Uh, whether Ireland gets there or not, hard to say. I mean, while Ireland is very far behind right now, the thing is Ireland's a small country. And so one massive offshore wind farm could sort the problem out. Now, whether that's going to happen or not is another issue. But if you think about it, if you look at the Irish grid, the electricity demand varies from a low of about 2 gigawatts demand to a high of about 5, depending on time of year, time of day, that kind of thing. So that peak of about 5 gigawatts demand would typically be a winter evening when everyone gets home from work and turns on the heat and turns on the TV and starts cooking dinner, that kind of time. And then the 2 gigawatt low would be overnight, probably on a summer night when everyone's asleep and there's very little demand. So it varies, it fluctuates between 2 and 5. There's an offshore wind farm at the Dogger Bank in the UK, supplying the UK, which is 3.2 gigawatts. So just one offshore wind park in the Dogger Bank, 3.2 gigawatts. So right there in one wind farm, you would be supplying a huge amount of Ireland's peak demand just from one wind farm. Now, that's a huge development, and I don't see Ireland building out something like that in the next 5 years. But, it could be done because, as I say, it's a small country with small demand. The other thing Ireland can and needs to do probably is build out some interconnects. They're building an interconnect between Ireland and France now, so they could bring in French nuclear power, for example. But those interconnects need to be large enough because it's the size of the interconnect is the limiting factor there.
Mm. And we're not transitioning quick enough because of it costs too much, or
Not really. We're not transitioning fast enough because there's a perceived lack of urgency, and there's also a lot of pushback from entrenched sources. So the fossil fuel industry, for example, are pouring hundreds of millions every year into PR campaigns telling us why we don't need to transition or why we should transition to gas because that's lower carbon rather than, and putting out all kinds of misinformation about EVs and wind turbines killing birds and all these other kinds of things. So they're doing everything they can to delay the transition, and they're being quite successful, I have to say. On the economics front, wind and solar are now the two cheapest forms of electricity generation to build out. It's now cheaper to build out a new solar or a new wind farm than it is to fuel existing fossil fuel plants. So, and the other thing is, if you think of time to build, if you set out today to build a large wind farm or a large solar farm, depends on the country, depends on the regulations, but the average time from start of project to generating electricity is around 2 years. You try that with a gas plant, it's around 5 years between all the environmental impact assessments and regulations and things that it has to go through. So A, it's cheaper to build out wind and solar. B, it's faster to build out wind and solar. And C, if you build a gas plant today, what are the chances it'll be operating in 2040? As we get closer and closer to 2050, chances are it'll be taken offline. And will you have made back your investment? Because when they typically build out coal plants or gas plants or whatever, they're expected to have a 40 to 50 year lifespan. So as I say, you start the project today, it comes online in 5 years, in 2030, maximum 10-year lifespan. So, it'll be shut down in 2040 probably. So that's a huge sunk cost. You're writing off a large chunk of money because you won't have made back your investment in those 10 years.
And if you're outsourcing logistics, you're doing a lot of supply chain activities in procurement, should you be all the time already looking for the electric option,
Yeah,
or?
yeah. I mean, this is a transition, and it's one that's happening, and it's going to take time. But if you are, yeah, procurement is extremely important, because most organizations, their emissions are broken down into three scopes: scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. The scope 1 and scope 2 are kind of your internal emissions that you generate from your manufacturing or from your purchase of electricity or whatever. Scope 3 typically make up between 60 and 80% of an organization's emissions. And what are scope 3? Scope 3 are the emissions that are associated with your supply chain, with your procurement. So absolutely, you want to start working with your suppliers to say, okay, we're going on this journey to be, let's say, net zero by 2030. You're one of our suppliers, so we're going to need you in the coming years to start to report your emissions associated with our purchase to us. And, everyone is going to start doing that. So what they're asking is you to measure and report your emissions so that you do that. And you won't have been the only company to approach them and say this to them. So they're going to start getting this request from other customers as well. And so everyone is going to have to start doing that. And of course, once you can start to see the emissions associated with your supplier base, you can then start to say, well, this supplier has this amount of emissions per kilometer, whereas this other supplier has about half of that. And their on-time delivery rates are roughly the same, and their price is roughly the same. Well, obviously, I'm going to go with the one with the lower emissions. So it is going to become a differentiator. As I mentioned earlier, it's going to be every business decision will be based on cost and emissions associated.
So it's a wonderful time for suppliers to really build partnerships.
Yes. Yep. And I get that it's going to be a challenging time, because for a lot of organizations who've never had to do this before, suddenly all of their customers are going to start asking them to now do this. And so every organization, big or small, is going to have to be able to measure and verifiably measure and report the emissions associated with their business.
Okay. So if we move on, I know you follow a lot about sustainability, a lot about tech. What's something that you've last witnessed that's a sustainable tech, something in the sustainable tech field?
Yeah, I know it's kind of cliched to say this, but I'm going to say AI, because just looking back over the last number of months of episodes of the Sustainable Supply Chain podcast, the amount of AI solutions. Now, I know everyone who has a product is now saying, I've got AI in my product. And, it's become a marketing thing. But actually, as I dig into the interviews with the people on the podcast, listening to some of their solutions on the AI and the way they're using AI, it's making a huge difference in a lot of cases. It really, really is. I had a company on called AI Ola, and what they do is they allow you to, with your voice, give commands. I know this sounds easy, but if you're in a kind of a warehouse situation, for example, you can you can give commands with your voice. It takes them in. It turns that voice command into structured data, which then is used in your ERP system. And so you can measure and report against it. You can as well do things like where if you were doing an inspection of, let's say, a machine before you start manufacturing, maybe you do it every morning at 8 a.m. or something like that. That inspection, a visual inspection with a clipboard, that might take 20 minutes. But the same inspection using voice might take 5 minutes. And instead of it going through a clipboard or an iPad or something, it's going straight structured data into your back-end system. So it takes out transcription errors, it takes out all kinds of things like that. so those kind of things, and that makes the organization far more efficient. I talked to a company as well who, how do I describe what they do? They make machines that allow companies to make fabric for things like seats. So the upholstery on seats and the upholstery in your car. They also make the machines that make clothes. And what they have is they have an online platform. And that platform, if you say to the machine, okay, I want to make the shirt, here's the cutout pieces that I need to make this shirt. What the platform does is it arranges those different pieces, the sleeves, the neck, etc. It arranges them in such a way that it maximizes, or maybe actually minimizes is the better word. It minimizes the amount of fabric required from that roll of fabric, so that they can get maybe 11 shirts out of a yard instead of 10. And it's minimizing the amount of waste. It's fitting the pieces together in an optimal form to, again, reduce waste. And so, there's lots and lots of stories like that. Through Lectro is the name of the company that does that, for example. And there's lots and lots of stories in the transportation space. It isn't all just go EV. There's also things about route planning, making sure that you minimize or optimize your route for maximum deliveries for minimum kilometers. There's things like making sure, simple stuff like make sure that you're not transporting air, that you completely fill up your vehicle to the max. And then there's other platforms that as well, if you're doing long haul trucking, try and match up the truck that is just delivered and is now empty with someone at the other end who wants something to come back. So there's all kinds of systems of that in place. So AI is enabling incredible changes in supply chain and enabling a lot of organizations to get their emissions down.
What do you think about the dark side of AI, that power consumption goes up?
Yeah, that is an issue, definitely. And coming from a data center background, I'm well aware of it. Having said that, I think there's two aspects to it that are going to get better. First of all, if you look at the curves for power usage by AI, first of all, it is going up, but compute is going up even more. So what I mean by that is, sure, the power consumption is going up, but the power consumption per compute unit is dropping. So they're becoming more efficient. So the AIs are getting better at being more efficient and not requiring as much power is the trend there. The other side is our electricity grids are becoming greener all the time. And so, yes, we are requiring more power, but the vast majority of new power that's coming onto the grid these days is renewable by orders of magnitude. And then the last thing I would say is that, as I mentioned earlier, what these AIs are typically doing in the workspace is they're making us more efficient, being able to produce more for less inputs, which is, again, a big sustainability win. So I think the power issue, while it is an issue right now, is a short-term issue that we will sort out.
Great. What's something controversial that you believe in, or you've noticed that's coming in the trends that other don't yet see it coming?
I think people driving internal combustion engine vehicles will be thought of the same way as people who smoke cigarettes. They're noisy,
That's deep.
smelly, polluting, nasty devices, that should come with a health warning. So, yeah, I think People driving internal combustion engine vehicles will be looked on the same way as cigarette smokers.
Mm. So, what about the older cars? Can you still have like a V8 engine? Would it be regarded as a cigar that you taste once in a while?
Probably. I mean, people still have horses, right?
Yeah.
And so, I don't see a case for them being outlawed. No, but like I say, I think they'll be looked on the same way as cigarettes. Um,
Mm.
and an important point to note here is one of the reasons I'm saying that is that the burning of fossil fuels directly contributes to more than 8 million deaths per year on the planet. That's more than COVID. More than 8 million people a year die as the direct result of the burning of fossil fuels. And so we need to stop. We absolutely need to stop. I mean, apart from the climate implications, just from the air pollution alone, we need to stop.
So, our time is slowly ending, also in this interview. So, is there anything that I haven't yet asked you that you'd like to tell more about?
No, I think we covered a good stretch. We got into a lot. So thank you for that, Anthony.
Thanks so much for joining us today and have an awesome day.
Thanks, Anthony, and thanks to everyone watching and listening. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks.